Hello and welcome to the Situation Report today. Very glad to have you joining me. And man, I'm excited about the conversation that was just recorded, the interview that you are about to hear. This is, of course, the show where we do our very best every episode to give you the information and perspectives you need to navigate an ever-changing culture. My name is Jeremy Stalnecker, and today I had the opportunity, the privilege of interviewing Davis Younts, who's been on our show before. Maybe you listened to that episode, but Davis Younts is a retired Air Force colonel. He was a JAG officer in the Air Force, is in private practice now, but representing a lot of military members who have had to deal with all of the COVID vaccination mandate stuff. And we talked about that before, but today with him on the show is Asa Miller. Asa is a former United States Navy SEAL. And many of you will remember there was a group of Navy SEALs that stood up against the mandates. And Asa was part of that. Davis was part of the team that represented them. And there's a documentary that talks about all of this called SEALs Beat Biden. Really talks about the mandates, where they came from, and the process of working through that. And I was very excited to be able to have them on today and to have this conversation. And it's a great conversation. But I'll tell you why I wanted to have this conversation. We've talked about these issues before, and I've had other people on who've talked about them, and we'll continue to talk about them because we need to. But there are kind of two angles on this for me. Number one, what was done was, I don't know what the word is. I was going to use the word abomination. That's probably not the right word. But the fact that the federal government and the leadership of the United States military mandated these vaccines and mandated them in such a way that many people lost their careers. Many people were either pushed out of the military very early, some at the end of their career, but before retirement. Many who are now out because of the administrative separation that pushed them out are having a hard time getting jobs. There's so much connected to this. And you think about the people who go into the military, by and large, are people that love our country and want to serve our country. And then this was imposed on them. Questions, concerns, decisions had to be made. And a lot of that is being worked through now because of people like Davis Younts and others who are representing them. But this is such an important issue. So that's one factor. The other one is this. I want to continue having conversations like this from time to time. We won't talk about it all the time, but from time to time, because as you'll hear in the interview, Davis mentions this, another issue will come up. There's going to be something else in the future that we will have to address. And we need to have these historical moments and these historical representations of what can and will happen. If we do push back, if we don't push back, if we let things happen, if we pretend like everything's okay, we need to know how to deal with it. We have an example, and we need to continue talking about it, because when the next issue comes up, we need to move fast. We need to push back hard. And we need to protect aggressively our individual freedoms. I've talked about this before, but as a conservative, if you were to ask me, what do you want out of life? Well, what I want out of life is peace, happiness, the same things everyone else wants. Largely, I just want to be left alone. I want to be able to worship God as I believe is right according to the Bible. I want to lead my family the way that I think that I should according to the Bible, as it pleases God. I want to worship. I want to do the things that I believe I should do. The Declaration of Independence talks about this inalienable right. It's given to us by God, the freedoms that we have. I want to live in that. I believe government should be limited to the extent that it protects us from foreign invaders, from those in our country that would seek to hurt us. It's protection. It's pushing back against what's on the outside. Minimal administration. We need some administration living in a large country with a lot of people, but a very small government with very little influence. And as a conservative, what that sometimes means to me is I just want to be left alone, and so I'm not going to get involved. Hopefully what we have learned over the last couple of years is that if we want to be left alone, we have to get involved. And I know that seems contrary, but we have to push back on these issues. We have to stand up. And if we want to be able to lead our families and worship God and go to church and do the things that we think are right without government interference, then we have to push back when the government inevitably tries to interfere. And so we have the opportunity to do that. This was a great conversation that speaks to so many of those things. And I definitely encourage you to check out the documentary that will be mentioned and the other places that Davis talks about, some other great organizations. But I hope that you appreciate this conversation. This is one that I believe you will enjoy listening to. But beyond that, this is something that you need to send to other people. So please do that. And that would be fantastic. Today's interview is with my guests, Davis Younts and Asa Miller. Gentlemen, I appreciate you joining. We are recording the day before Thanksgiving, so it's kind of the last minute work before we go into this holiday, but appreciate you guys jumping on. A very important topic. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Asa, I'll start with you. A lot of folks who have listened to our show would know Davis, and I'll have you, even Davis, talk a little bit about your background and how you got involved in this. But Asa, talk about your military service. Served as a Navy SEAL, and like for so many people, and I've known so many people that went into the military with the best of intention and kind of that idea of serving the country, and then everything happened that has happened in the last few years and changed a lot of that, a lot of disillusionment, and then a lot of action on the other side of that. But talk about why you went into the military, kind of your military background, where you served, and give us some context of that before we jump into what the Biden administration then later dumped on everybody.
First, I grew up in a military family. My dad served for 27 years in the Marine Corps. So I was born in Jacksonville.
That's good heritage right there.
Exactly. The best. So I was born in Jacksonville, North Carolina, moved around the country with him. And then when he ended up retiring in 2012, I spent a few years in high school, civilian world, and then joined the Navy pretty much right out of high school. So the way that works for us is I got a contract that guaranteed me a shot at BUDS. So I go to boot camp up in Chicago, then headed out west to San Diego for about a year and a half worth of training for our pipeline. Yeah. So after the pipeline, I chose to go East Coast. It's kind of a split 50-50, if you will, for team guys. And I did my first deployment and workup cycle, which is about 2 years long, out here on the East Coast. And towards the tail end of that is when COVID kind of got unleashed on us in its various forms. So the last about 18 months of my Navy career, total 6 years, was spent battling the mandates, more or less.
What is, I'm always interested in the family connection, right? So your dad spent, you said 27 years in the Marine Corps.
Correct.
So, a long career. I'm sure he did a lot of things, but for you then as his son to want to go into the military, obviously this was a positive experience, right? This was something that you wanted to follow perhaps in your dad's footsteps or whatever. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but this is something he would have wanted for you or encouraged for you, right? So when you're going through all of the stuff that you've had to deal with over the last couple of years, what was he saying to you, or how was he responding to that? I'm sure that had to have been very, very difficult as a father, right? To watch your son go through that, a son who was essentially kind of following in your footsteps.
Yeah, it was difficult. And it's interesting because during his time in the service, I was still too young to remember this, but they had the anthrax vaccine came out as well. And that was something he battled himself. And he had a hard time making a decision one way or the other. Obviously, he chose to get it and stayed in. And then also he went through the Obama purges where, a lot of senior leadership were removed by President Obama. And so he kind of saw the writing on the wall, but he was still very excited for me to join. He still knew that it could teach me, a lot of lessons, build my character. So he was excited. And then when this unraveled, his advice, because he was a huge sounding board for me, for sure, was just, hey, think through everything. Read, pray, study, make sure that you have, everything, you're crossing your T's and dotting your I's, making sure you have the facts here. And he actually has pursued a ministry degree after the military. So he was a huge help for me theologically, wrote up a lot of information, pulled a lot of pieces together to kind of guide me in and give me some wisdom in how to fight this.
Yeah. What is your faith background? Obviously, that's important in this conversation, but talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so we grew up PCA, which is Presbyterian, Reformed, and so as a kid, all of that kind of went over my head. To be honest with you, I read the Bible. I did Bible study with the family, went to church, but it wasn't until I kind of got knee deep into my own military career where I was away from family, and then adversity starts kind of building up, and you have nobody else to turn to, and so that's when my own personal faith really took root, and I was able to kind of grow and develop my own sense of theology and then just religion in general.
Davis, maybe you can talk a little bit about so at this juncture with everything that came down around COVID and the COVID vaccine specifically. Talk about your background a little bit, having been a JAG officer and served in the military and now in private practice. How did you get involved with Asa and the other SEALs who, in a lot of ways, were the first ones to stand up and kind of collectively stand up? A lot of people stood up, I guess, but collectively come together and say, we need to push back on this. How did you get involved in this?
Yes, it's a great question. I think I've talked with you about this before, but this was a personal fight for me. I was a little over 18 years in when COVID started happening and there was so much going on. So I was looking at this from my own perspective, and it was one or two people that I knew. I was a lieutenant colonel in the reserves at the time. There's only one or two people I knew that were really questioning this, felt isolated, quite frankly.
Yeah.
That I was, preparing to fight and had a few close folks that I was going to fight it with. And I got a phone call. I got a phone call at 11:45 at night from a constitutional law attorney, no military experience. But I had met him and knew him well. And that's really how I got involved. He said, there's a group of Navy SEALs on the East Coast. There's more than 30 of them. They're being told if they don't get the shot tomorrow, they're going to be court-martialed, thrown in the brig. They're getting all kinds of threats. So that was a Tuesday night. By Friday, I was in a room. It ended up being over 60 people that came, not all SEALs, but East Coast guys that met in a room with a group of pastors, myself and Bradley Pierce is the other attorney. That's where I met Asa. So that's really how I became involved in this. God, laid it on our hearts to come together and come up with a game plan. And I got to be a part of that. But I will say Asa was one of two people out of that room of everyone else. He was one of two people who I sat down with the room and said, hey, this is the game plan we're going to use for you to push back on this vaccine. But I told him, I looked him in the eyes and said, if you make this decision, this course you're going on, they will court-martial you. That is their intent. Right. Just understand that's what we're preparing for. And that's what we did. So that's why, Asa and I have stayed pretty close since that moment, right, as you can imagine. But that moment is really how I got involved in this fight on a bigger scale, on a public scale. And God just laid on my heart that this story needed to be told, that what was happening with these Navy SEALs, guys like Asa were not in a position to speak for themselves, but there was Pastor Jeff Durbin and myself were people that said, okay, we can talk about this. I, as a reservist, can talk about it for myself. And that's where we're at. So it really is because of guys like Asa and the public stand that they took that there was an injunction in federal court that saved me. I violated an order to get the vaccine. My religious accommodations were denied. I violated the order. I was waiting for a reprimand and to get kicked out 6 months shy of 20-year retirement. And an injunction saved me. Probably within 24 to 48 hours was the timing that God had for that. So I'm now retired from the reserves as a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force. But yeah, that's how Asa and I met and how we stayed close.
So I want the two of you, or I'd like for the two of you to tell kind of the story and how it unfolded and what that all looks like. And then, get to the point of explaining why that's important, right? But maybe Davis, you can go back for me. I'd like to come back to this again and again because this is something that I've struggled with throughout this COVID mandate in the military, and I've worked through it. I've talked to people like you and other people who have helped me work through this. But 2003, I went to Iraq. Part of that was so oddly, like vaccines is a funny conversation for people in the military, right? Because there's so many vaccines. We were headed to Okinawa, Japan. So I think we got 6 vaccines or something for that deployment. And then 2 weeks later, it was like, oh, hey, no, we're sending you to Kuwait, probably into Iraq. So There's another battery of vaccines. So I think I had 11 shots in a week or something. But you go through that process. You're in the military. You don't really think about it. At least we didn't then. But the anthrax vaccine was new. And Asa, you mentioned this. And for me, I just kind of went, well, I guess this is what we do. And I didn't think a whole lot about it. I took it. There were Marines in our battalion. So we deployed to Kuwait. We were there as part of the initial invasion into Iraq. So this is the front end of this thing, and the front end of the anthrax vaccine being fielded on a large scale. So there were Marines in our battalion who didn't get it. They lied about it. It was a whole thing. They ended up going through. They weren't court-martialed, just short of that. We had to deploy. It was kind of a whole thing, right? They ended up getting out without the ability to stay in at the end of their enlistment. So all of that happened. At the time, I was upset at them for trying to keep us from being ready to go to war, right? All these things. Okay, so this is my context. So then we get to this conversation about the COVID vaccine, and I've been asked this 10,000 times probably, maybe not 10,000, probably an exaggeration, a whole bunch of times. And I've had to work through this in my own brain is, okay, what makes this different than that? Why weren't we screaming about that at that time? And this is different. What makes this different? So again, I think for context, that's really important for, Davis, you do a great job explaining this. Why is this one different than so many of the other things military members have been through over, a few hundred years of doing stuff and being mandated things? Why is this one different?
So there's kind of two things, but I will note this, and a lot of people miss this, but the anthrax vaccine, the order that was given to military members, it stopped being done in 2004 because a federal court said the order to get the anthrax vaccine was an unlawful order. So we have to, we have 2020 hindsight when it comes into COVID that it was not properly FDA approved. So you fast forward to COVID, and there were two issues going on. And there were more, but the first issue for many people was the issue of whether or not there was an FDA approved vaccine, right? And this seems crazy. Yeah, they said the FDA approved the vaccine. The issue was the vaccine manufacturers, there was no incentive for them to actually produce the formula of the vaccine that was FDA approved. So they were forcing military members to take an experimental use vaccine. Right. And the problem with that is that's a violation of federal law. So we can argue about a whole lot of things, but at the end of the day, Congress passed a law in the late 90s to end experimentation, medical experimentation on military members. That was part of the issue with the anthrax, and it was happening again. So there were people like me, I came into the Air Force right after 9/11, so I wasn't deployed like you were on the tip of the spear, but I came in right around the same time frame. I was in law school and I signed up. So I saw some of the anthrax stuff as a JAG, and I ended up getting the anthrax vaccine myself. Later, I didn't see the issues, same as you. And then the courts came back and said, no, the military got this wrong. And it really opened my eyes because I was like, that's absolutely right. They were wrong. These people were wronged. And then, so one piece is just, this was an unlawful order. They jumped the gun. They didn't follow the law. So this was the Department of Defense and the executive branch ignoring the Constitution and saying, we don't have to follow federal law. So a lot of people were bothered by that. A lot of military members said, hey, that's our oath to support and defend the Constitution. Yeah, We're not going to go rogue with the executive branch. There's a balance of power for a reason. So that's one piece of it. The other piece is a religious faith piece. And that is complicated. It's very individualized. One, for many, many people, for me personally, it was the tie to aborted fetal cells. I could do the research and see this was a medical product that was tested and developed using aborted fetal cell tissue. And while there's aborted fetal cell tissue in all kinds of products, all kinds of medicine and everything else, once I was made aware of that, my conscience was not clear if I knowingly continued to go along with that. So that's part of it. For others, for many, many others, there were other religious objections to this, including the idea of there needs to be limits on the federal government's authority to impose medical mandates like this, to invade that sphere of authority. And there's questions on that. But I will tell you, and Asa can speak to this as well, many of the Navy SEALs and other military members that were involved in this, these guys looked at this and said, the federal government is engaging in tyranny across the country. There are civilians being subjected to all kinds of mandates in violation of their basic rights, in violation of their religious freedom, and somebody needs to take a stand and put a stop to it at the tip of the spear. And Asa can speak to that more deeply, but that's where a lot of these guys were coming from.
Yeah, that's good, and that's very, very helpful. Because it has been an issue. I have a lot of friends who are still in the military. Many who, like you, were at 18 years, and it came down to, and for many of them, a decision between, am I going to take care of my family? Am I going to do this? Am I not? And so much conflict and so much friction, and trying to work through that with them and help them with that. That's very, very helpful. Asa, tell the story. Talk to us about, and there's a documentary, and we'll talk about some of that as well. But talk about kind of the process. So this order came down. How did a group of Navy SEALs come together on this, reaching out to attorneys for representation? What was the story here?
Yeah, well, the whole story is told in SEALs Beat Biden, as you kind of alluded to right there, but a documentary that not only lays out this story, but also shows, like we're doing today, how this is still impacting the military and is kind of mutating into multiple different avenues of approach from these political and, sold out leaders. But yeah, so the way it started with us was, or for me personally, I was on deployment to Africa at the time so the initial COVID shutdown had kind of happened while I was still in my workup. And then everyone kind of went back to work. Things were starting to go back to normal. I deployed overseas in 2020 in the fall. And while we were over in Africa for the first few months, it was business as usual, training partner force, kind of, going out, doing our little patrols. It was not a big deal. But once we moved our base to kind of the more centrally located naval station in Djibouti, Africa, every time there was kind of a COVID outbreak, one time in particular, I was in Mogadishu on a separate little mission, and my platoon was stuck on this, large naval base, and a couple guys tested positive and were put into solitary confinement. Everyone who tested positive and all the close contacts, more or less our entire section of the base. And for 10 to 14 days, no communication really with family. They couldn't get their own meals, and they were miserable. And again, none of these guys were sick. A couple runny noses, sure, but no one was, not mission capable.
Yeah.
And so I thankfully avoided that. And when I came back a few weeks later, I kind of heard the horror stories, and there was kind of this unspoken order rumor, if you will, that had come out that said, hey, if you don't get these new J&J vaccines when they come out, then your rotation home is going to be affected. Like, you might not be eligible to get on a military aircraft. And so everyone who had just been in solitary confinement, they've been gone 6 months, they want to go home. And so they were like, sign me up. Like, I'm going home as, day one. So
Right.
the J&J came out, and everyone, almost to a man, who had been in Djibouti at the time, got vaccinated. We didn't get any health briefs. We didn't get, we had no information at all. And thankfully, thank God I had been in Mogadishu and had no real experience with that. And so I was like, well, I don't need the vaccine. I wasn't, panicked or anything about, getting put in solitary. And so I held off with me and a couple other friends who had been with me. And just like we thought, we got on the military airplanes.
Can I stop you real quick? Why did you hold off? Because
Yeah.
you didn't have information. It wasn't, again, different than any other vaccine. Why did you decide to wait?
Yeah. I take pride in what goes in and, out of my body. And so I am a little hesitant to put anything into me, into my body without doing research on it. That's just how I grew up. And, kind of what I've taken pride in myself. So I had some hesitancy, definitely from the beginning, of just like, hey, I don't know anything about these. These developed very quickly. It wasn't that I was maybe against them wholeheartedly. I just was being cautious.
Sure.
And also, I'd been tested positive twice for COVID. And so I knew, I had antibodies and I was good.
Yeah.
So why would I put this, this new thing into me, and without any idea of what it was going to do? So it didn't make sense to me. And I think we all know by then, spring of 21, a lot of questions were being raised about COVID. Like, why were all these mandates put? Why were businesses closed? Why were churches closed? So I had a lot of questions that were kind of around the periphery, not really vaccine related, but COVID related. So I was much more hesitant to just jump on board with something again, like buying all the toilet paper at Sam's Club.
Right.
So,
Right.
so yeah, I get home in the spring of 21, and I jumped straight back into my next workup. I, went to my, preferred school. I was working on a major qual, and the whole summer of 21, there were rumors like, hey, this might be mandated. We had a lot of our, our new OICs, our officers and senior leadership would put out questionnaires like, hey, when are you going to get it? Or, what's it going to take for you to get? And it went through like 2 or 3 different stages of that, of the questions being rephrased to try to get guys to just get it. And then it came down to September of 21. We officially said, me and 20 other guys at my SEAL team in particular said, we are not going to get this. A few said they would get it if it was FDA approved, because at that time it still seemed like it would be an okay idea. And our SEAL team, my particular SEAL team, said, if you're not getting it by, September, you're kicked out. And so they booted us, not from our actual SEAL team. We never got different orders. They just stopped letting us muster with our platoons, and they sent us over to our parent command on fake orders. We like TAD orders that didn't even have our actual names on them. They just had a random grouping of people's names. And so that's when the chaos really started, was September of 21.
So you receive these fake orders or collective orders or whatever they were, and you are separated from your unit. I guess I'd ask you, what are you thinking or what are you feeling? Again, this is a tough situation. You had been in for 6 years at that time. Is that right?
So at that point, it'd been just over, I want to say 4.5 years is where I was at right then.
This is one of the crazy things to me about this whole thing, right? Depending on where you were in your military service, in terms of time invested and so forth, you can be more or less bullied by the government. This is one of the craziest things to me, that, so you were at a great place in your career because you could say, all right, if I have to cut here, then that's what I have to do. But then you've got guys who are, 19 years. I mean, I had a friend get kicked out at 19 and a half years. He was administratively separated. He's going through the process of trying to, finish that last 6 months now. And I mean, that happened to a lot of people. So praise God, you were kind of at the place you were, I think, which probably helped. But what's going through your mind? What's going through your heart? And then what'd you do next?
Yeah. So I'm going to touch on that idea
Please
that you just touched on a little bit, because for me, single guy at the time, I wanted to do 20 years. I thought that, I'd follow my dad's footsteps, as we kind of talked about before. Who doesn't love being not only in the military, but in the SEALs? I can't imagine a better job. So there was definitely no desire to just cut. That's the job I wanted. But then also for guys around me, I have friends who were with me at the time who were recently married. I had friends who had babies on the way, and then also there were guys who outside of my team who had been in for 19, 18 years, like you're talking about. There was even, an officer who had just gotten his platoon commander, which is more or less the capstone of your career for a SEAL officer, unless you're trying to, be an admiral. So yeah, it was a diverse crowd. And so by no means was it, only a bunch of, 4 years in guys, but
I didn't mean that to be disrespectful, just to give perspective.
No.
Like, people are on a different journey, right? And so when we look at people making these decisions, I think we have to understand, like you said, it's a diversity of journeys. Like, people are figuring this out from all different perspectives.
Yeah, no, and I just want to make sure that your listeners know that, like, some of these guys, I mean, and you talked about some of the guys, the coercion of the military being able to kind of control you based on your career, not only at the end, but some of the guys who said no were brand new guys who had just received, you just got to the team after spending 18 months in buds, getting their stuff pushed in. And so those guys, I mean, I will forever tip my hat to them. Their courage to be able to just give up everything that they had just worked for without reaping any rewards. But anyway, I'll progress. So getting removed from the team, I mean, that was a gut punch for sure. we had no idea what was going to happen. Davis has kind of touched on it. Court martialing. We heard stories of guys getting put in the brig. There were guys on, ships in port who were getting stuck in solitary confinement of their own. And so, as far as like personal concerns, personal well-being, we're like, are we about to be put in the brig for this? Or just asking questions? Right. Also career, are we going to have, money to buy food next month? I don't know.
Right. Right.
And so we went about it as best we could. We went to our parent command. We asked them, hey, what's happening here? Can we get answers? Can we ask questions? Who do we do these? How do we go about this? And they wouldn't give us anything. It shows it in the documentary a little bit, but they had some choice words for us. They didn't want to give us the time of day. And very quickly, after meeting with Davis, and we were able to get some actual legal paperwork filed showing that we weren't just, being insubordinate, we were being serious about this. They realized that they had no legal standing. I think, in my opinion, Davis could speak to it, but they had no legal standing to do this. So in my particular instance, they just sent all of us away. They stopped communicating with us for 6 months. And so we were all local still, really. But we never got a text message. We weren't given a job, a task, a mission. We had all of our gear taken away, no access to weapons. Our key cards were shut off, so we couldn't even get into ranges or our old team building. And so we were left alone for 6 months by ourselves with nothing. And so that was, a super weird place to be. We were still receiving a paycheck, but we had no chain of command. We had no accountability, and we had no idea where our careers were going. In November, I had signed a piece of paper saying that in 10 days I would be separated. I was just waiting on a letter to arrive starting November 21 that said, when I got that 10-day letter, I would be separated. And I stayed in that status from November 21 until I separated in May of this year. So, I mean, kind of constant back and forth mind battle of like, what is happening? What do I do? Do I go get a second job? Do I need to move? Like, it was wild.
And no input at all from your command or a representative of the command or someone from the adjutant's office, nothing at all.
No, in fact, our team commander and senior enlisted leader, all through that summer, as they were kind of trying to convince and coerce, they would, have periodic meetings with us. As soon as that September deadline came, even though we were officially, according to official orders at their command, at their team, they didn't speak to us for over a year. And, not even a text message, just zero communication from our actual chain of command.
What was, I don't know if you can answer what was the reason for that, but they would call you insubordinate if you didn't respond to your command. What is it called when the command doesn't respond to those they're responsible for? And what liability is held there?
It's a good question. And something I've been thinking about a lot this whole time is I just kind of reverse that, take us in a different situation, take us out of, the COVID, craziness. Imagine if a platoon commander or a platoon OIC just didn't muster his platoon for 6 months or didn't talk to his guys for a year. Imagine what would happen to that. Yeah.
I was an infantry platoon commander. I can't imagine not going down there for one afternoon. I mean, if I had a Marine get in trouble, on leave in another country, that was my fault, right? Like I can't even fathom that.
I can't either to this day. And that's one of the other reasons for SEALs Beat Biden is because this is a complete dereliction of duty by pretty much the entire senior leadership in the military. And just as we saw in Afghanistan, there's zero accountability. So if we just continue passing the puck down the line, like our military, our entire institution, the trust that not only the public has in it, but the actual service members, that there'll be zero trust left. I mean, they've already broken it for most of us, but the little bit they have, I mean, if we let this continue, I mean, the precedents that have been set over the last few years are incredible.
So it seems to me, or it feels to me, some of these policies, definitely the mandate has been reversed and a lot of these things have been changed, but that the response from military leadership has been, hey, sorry about that. Let's get on with what we're doing, right? And it's like, hey, let's forget about that whole that whole thing. I think it was ABC had a report that they published in April of 2021. So during this period of time you're talking about, and the Department of Defense had put out a report that said active duty suicides had gone up 25%. Now it was much higher in some of the branches than others, but an average of 25%. And active duty suicides had held very low for decades, and went up 25%. I mean, we're told now it's over 4 a day. And that was during the period of lockdowns. And that's what the Department of Defense attributed that to. So it's funny in all of this, funny in an odd sense, that we've gotten through this. And now we're kind of going, oh, hey, let's forget about what we did back there and let's just move on. So Davis, where are we now? Where do we stand now in all of this?
It's still a mess legally. You've probably seen it, but just this week, Army folks that were discharged and Air Force enlisted that were discharged, who didn't get the vaccine, were discharged because of COVID, got a form letter in the mail. Doesn't even have their name on it. It's a form letter. I have Air Force folks that I've talked to that actually got one that had poorly cut and pasted language that included Army language in it because it was so poorly done. But they've sent out these letters asking people to come back without giving them a path to fix their records other than going to the Board of Corrections or the Discharge Review Board, which is a 2-year messy process, as you know. And so we're still in a complete mess. You have a situation where the Department of Defense has never had to acknowledge the illegal aspects of what they did. They never have had to acknowledge the fact that the Inspector General for the Department of Defense found that all of the services were violating the religious freedom rights of military members. No one has ever been held accountable for that. I mean, federal courts found it. The Department of Defense settled in federal court on that issue, but the IG founded that complaint and nothing was ever done about it. No one was fired. No one was held accountable. So you have a situation where you have senior leaders in the Department of Defense that are still doing their jobs with no acknowledgement of the issues that happened over COVID, no acknowledgement that it was handled poorly, and no acknowledgement that they just simply ignored federal law, ignored constitutional religious freedom rights. So the problem right now, the frustration that I have is, where's the accountability for that? And how am I going to look a young man in the eye that I'm mentoring or talking to at church, family members, other things? How am I going to look them in the eye when they ask me, should I serve in the military?
Right.
And my answer is, it's really tough. It really has to be a special calling right now. And it's not simply about a vaccine. There are things that happen historically that show us, at least I believe, they show us where the foundation is eroded. What happens when we turn from Christ? What happens when we don't recognize, foundational, fundamental truths anymore? And what happened with the vaccine, what happened with the withdrawal from Afghanistan just demonstrates, it just reveals the leadership problems that we have in the military and what happens when we focus on things that are not related to accomplish the mission. And when we make compromises for something other than the foundational beliefs, the biblical beliefs that our country was founded on. So I don't mean to preach a sermon on that, but that's my good frustration with all of this. When we look at this and we think about where we're at legally, we're still broken legally. This hasn't been fully addressed. It hasn't gone all the way through the court system. But again, what we know to be true, what everyone knows to be true, if we're honest, is at a minimum, religious freedom rights were violated and no one's been held accountable for that.
It's important for people to understand too, a lot of people look at this as a military problem, or you served in the military, and so that's why it's your problem. When we do like mission planning, it was always, okay, what are the second, third order effects of this? If this goes wrong, what else will be affected? What else will be impacted? Are we willing to accept that risk? I know so many young men who served in the Marine Corps, decided not to get the vaccine, were administratively separated, and now can't work in a government job. So they can't become police officers. They can't become firefighters. They can't work anywhere that requires any kind of federal oversight because of their separation code from the military. And so the idea of going back through a review board or trying to, okay, so we'll change it, but you have to go through this process. So now they can't work because of something else that happened or because of this process that's been set before them. So you think about that. Okay, well, it's not a military problem anymore. Now it's a civilian problem because this guy's a civilian. and then it impacts their families and it impacts these other agencies. But to your point, this to me has raised an issue outside of even just the military, but any municipality. I mean, we see police departments doing this and fire departments doing this across the country, and businesses, and the lack of leadership. And I guess to me, that is why this is such an important issue to address and for people to be aware of, because this can happen to you too, regardless of where you live and where you work and what you're a part of. Even if you work for yourself. My sister owns a business, but because everything around her shut down, she did her best. And a lot of what she did was under the table because she was trying to work. But when everything around you shuts down, even if you think, well, I have autonomy, you really don't. And that makes this a very, very important issue.
And I was just going to touch on that real quick. Is something to think about is that not only could it, but it would have happened if we hadn't stood up and put these lawsuits in action.
Yes,
because
that's
if
right.
people remember back in 21, I mean, the Biden administration was trying to put mandates that just like that happened to the military. They tried to do that to the civilian sector, to the healthcare industries, to airlines. They tried to do it to everyone. And It was only the fact that we were able to get these lawsuits started that these same mandates didn't ruin hundreds of thousands of more lives.
What do we do on this side of a lot of this? And again, it's messy. We're working through it. I say we. I'm not doing anything. I'm talking about it. You guys are working through this, which I appreciate. What do we do to keep this from happening again? Or is it possible to keep it from happening again? Or is it simply now that people are awake, they need to push back fast? What do we do?
And there's a lot that needs to be done. My biggest thing that I talk to people about is we do need to be prepared for the next issue that comes, right? We have to understand, we're a republic, we're founded on biblical principles, and there are, God gave us spheres of authority and a basic template for how to have a thriving, blessed society. We can do that if we recognize the civil government has a sphere of authority, the church has a sphere of authority, the family and the individual have spheres of authority. We have to go back to that. We have to have these conversations. We have to understand that. We have to think through those things, because what we see, I fear, and what we need to be prepared to push back against is the idea that we can just live in a world where we can go to church on Sunday and we can have our family and we can have our education, and that we live in a neutral world, that in the public square, in polite conversation, we don't have to talk about faith. We don't have to talk about these things. Because the problem is there's no such thing as neutrality. Our nation, by and large, has adopted secular humanism, atheistic secular humanism, as our religion. That's the religion of the day. And that religion is what led to communism, socialism, and the bloodiest century in human history. The most oppression in human history came from that. So we have to, I think, just begin with a recognition of that. We have to pray for revival. We have to work. And part of being able to push back against, the next thing that comes like this, and there will be something else that comes.
Yeah.
The next thing that comes is we need to be doing what we're doing here. We need to be talking about it. We need to be accurate in what we talk about in history. That's why, I wanted to be a part of this documentary, is to help tell this story. But the other thing we need to be doing is we need to be building community and preparing for it. So, how do we build resiliency in our own lives? How do we take care of our family? How do we make sure we have strong marriages, that we're raising our children right, that we're involved in a solid local church that's building that resiliency? Because it was people coming together. It was people like Asa and I being put together, and God had ordained that. There was nothing Asa and I could have ever done that would have brought us together. And there were so many connections that God had ordained ahead of time, but that could have never happened. So we need to be building and working for those things. And we cannot just cede ground to the world and think that society is going to be blessed and flourished without the influence of the gospel.
Yeah, man, that's so good. That's so good. Talk about the documentary and then where people can watch it, find it, and follow and support the work that you do. Not just follow, but also support the work that you're involved in.
For the documentary, just head over to sealsbeatbiden.com. It's nice and simple. The first episode has already been released for a couple of days now. So it'll just put in your email and it'll get you behind the paywall to watch the first episode. And then stay tuned. Over the next few weeks, we'll have, I think, 2 more episodes will be coming out. So we're really excited to kind of share this story and make the connections for the American people, that this is not just a shot, as Davis has been saying. There's a bigger plot here. And like he said, we need to be talking about it. We need to recognize it, and we need to fight back against it, which I'm going to hand off to Davis, because he's got some work on that area.
That's good.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's sealsbeatbiden.com. It's free. You just have to go and sign up. The entity that's put it out is something called the Republic Sentinel. It's a fairly new news media outlet, very conservative, but founded on Christian values. So they have a lot of great content that they're putting out. So if you go and you sign up and you watch the documentary, you also get, sort of a daily email from them with a couple of news stories from a Christian perspective that are great. So they're doing great work over there. But the other thing I will say about that too is part of what Seals Beat Biden does is tell the story of a nonprofit that was started by Jeff Durbin and Apologia Church called Stand With Warriors. And Stand With Warriors was literally developed to try to help find attorneys for these guys and then try to help pay for legal fees. There were a lot of attorneys, even ones with JAG experience like I had, that didn't want to take these cases. They thought it would be bad for business. So that was one of the biggest challenges. So the documentary tells a little bit about that story, but the great thing too is Stand With Warriors that started there is been, I wouldn't say repurposed, but we have expanded our mission. So there is another Navy SEAL that was in Asa's situation that left. He was kicked out over the COVID vaccine. His name's Danny O'Neill. He's just finishing seminary now. He's going to be leading a evangelism and small group discipleship movement that's going to start with Navy SEALs, tip of the spear guys, to do that. And then the goal with Stand With Warriors into the future is to create a membership-based legal leadership training and legal advocacy piece for military members. So the idea would be military members can, it's not set up to do it yet, but our goal would be it's self-sustaining, where guys that are in leadership positions can join, and we'll do periodic training. We'll talk about legal issues. But then if you have a problem, unlike being on defense like we were over this, we'll be on offense, because we'll have a network of guys and attorneys to say, look, you're going to object to, a transgender surgery. You're going to object to, a pronoun policy. We already have the people in place. We already have the community in place, and we're ready for this. We're ready to challenge it on constitutional and legal grounds so that we don't have to play defense, and it's there. And the future of this, not to sound bleak, but the future of this is very, very real. The federal government is putting out, diversity, equity, equal opportunity policies that say that gender is fluid, but you have to identify someone correctly by their gender or their preferred or identified gender, or you're violating and discriminating against them when gender is fluid. So it could change day to day. Just imagine the chaos that causes with things like uniform standards in the military.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, you have Department of Defense civilians, maybe they're pharmacists or doctors that are being forced to participate in transgender surgeries and prescribing, or dispensing prescriptions for that in violation of their faith. And if they take a stand, then they're going to be subjected to EO complaints and the devastating impact that has, whether it's military or their civilian career. So there's a lot of work to be done here. Yeah. And again, SEALs Beat Biden. I'm just so grateful to God that these guys had the resources to put it together to tell the story. It's really important. And there's more that's going to be happening as we move forward together. So,
man, so much important work. And, you talked about Apologia briefly, but they do such incredible work. Jeff and Luke are amazing. They're into everything. Every time I see like some major issues, like, oh, and Jeff did a video on that. Like it's constant, but they think so clearly. And I'm so thankful they, really got behind this. And Davis, for you, man, what important work. You mentioned this briefly when you were talking, but having a young person come to you now and say, I want to go into the military, what do you say? And it breaks my heart, because that's all I had ever wanted to do, and did it. And I was so thankful for my service. My 14-year-old son is talking about a lot of different things, but he's recently been talking about going into the military, and and it's, man, that's a who knows what the military will look like in a few years, right? But that's a tough conversation to have, and to balance the, we need to seek God and see what God wants you to do and pursue that with we know what that world looks like now. And I no longer have those rose-colored, or red, white, and blue colored maybe glasses on anymore. And it's, man, such an important thing that you are doing, that both of you are doing, and very thankful for your work, and really appreciate you just taking a stand and helping the rest of us understand what we can do. So thank you for the conversation, and I hope that you both have a great Thanksgiving.
Thanks, brother. God bless you.
We were not made to live in isolation. Sadly, many of our veterans feel they need to fight their battles alone. This self-isolation has led to the staggering statistic of more than 20 veterans taking their lives every day.
A lot of guys end up drinking, a lot of guys end up losing hope. Some of them will go to the VA and they'll try to get, prescription medications to help with PTSD. They'll get pills for anxiety, they'll get pills because they can't sleep, now they'll get pills for depression. Before they know it, they're taking 12 different medications. And when it's not working out, these guys lose hope, and that's why there's 23 guys a day committing suicide.
The mission of Mighty Oaks is to eradicate the veteran suicide epidemic and help our warriors change their legacies. As a result, we've been able to help over 4,000 veterans and first responders by equipping them with the tools they need to live the lives they were created to live.
Everything they said just kept hitting me in the heart over and over and over again. It's like all the things that I didn't know that I needed to hear. And I opened my heart to God that week, dude, and I've been a different person ever since.
Our faith-based, peer-to-peer approach has one of the highest success rates of any program available today, offering hope and understanding to those who need it most. We provide our programs and resources, including travel, at no cost to our warriors.
I remember talking to a licensed social worker who actually handed me a pamphlet to Mighty Oaks. So I went, and I'm glad I did.
By aligning their lives to biblical principles, these men and women are able to lead their families, their communities, and our nation. Our mission is to serve and restore our nation's warriors and families who have endured hardship through their service to America, and to help them find new life purpose through hope in Christ. It's your generosity that can make a difference in the lives of the men and women who have fought for our country and our freedoms. Now that they're home, don't let them fight alone. Learn more at mightyoaksprograms.org. On MyPillow's 20-year anniversary, with over 80 million MyPillows sold, Mike Lindell at MyPillow wants to thank each and every one of you by giving you the lowest price in history on their MyPillows. You will receive a queen-size MyPillow for $19.98. Regular price is $69.98, and just $10 more for a king size. You will receive deep discounts on all MyPillow products, such as bed sheets, mattress toppers, pet beds, mattresses, my slippers, and so much more. This is the time to try out some of their other amazing products you've had your eye on. Go to mypillow.com and click on the radio podcast square and use promo code SITREP to receive this amazing offer on the queen size MyPillow for $19.98, or call 800-870-0283. This offer comes with a 10-year warranty and a 60-day money-back guarantee. It's time to start getting the quality sleep you deserve. Go to mypillow.com and use promo code SITREP, or call 800-870-0283. Very grateful for that conversation, of course, and please go check out the documentary, check out the other organizations that were mentioned by Davis, and hopefully we'll have him back on to talk about some of these other issues pertaining to our military, but really to our rights as Americans. And we have the opportunity now to make some strong decisions and do some things that are really important for the future. And I know that he will certainly continue to do that. Guys like Asa out there standing up, but really not for themselves. They're standing up for all of us, and I so appreciate that. So please go and check that out. Thank you for watching and or listening. If you have not yet subscribed to this podcast, you need to subscribe. So go ahead and do that. Subscribe wherever you are, and then go check out our website, thesitrep.org. You can find all of our archived episodes. We've got some great episodes and have had some great guests, so please go and check that out. Appreciate you listening. We will talk to you next time.